All right, you ready to get primitive? Let's get primitive with these mollusks. Look at these guys. Look at them. Oh my goodness. They have a little curved shell, a little sort of accordion shell. Some of them have a massive little water pipe back here. Presumably that's an X-current flow pipe, so they'll bring it in through the front and oxygenate their gills, pick up their waste, all this stuff, and then just flush it out the back like a little sort of a turbo snail, basically. Um, the coiling appears to be endogastric, so the head would be up here. It coils around toward the, or the coiling is going this way, if you like. So when they have those little spouts, they tend to be pointed back there, which is the direction it came from, and you'll find that quite commonly. Animals will deposit their waste out the back and keep moving forward. Yeah. They resemble gastropods, and they also resemble in some ways potentially the monoplacophorans, the Tribladida. And it's kind of a question where you put these, but these are the Halcyonellids, named after Halcyonella, which is a particular one of these. And look at the size of that. That's like one of those trucks with a massive exhaust pipe. Look at that thing compared to the size of the shell. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous. These look amazing. They are super tiny, and you find these mostly in the early to mid Cambrian. These will be among the small shelly fauna that you can get sometimes by dissolving and sieving bits of rock when the diagenetic material is suitable. Let's have a look at some of these things. So you'll notice on the tip there's a little swelling here. This is going to be the earliest shell. You can call this the protegulum, or they'll have specialized names for this once we get to cephalopods. But this is just the baby's first shell kind of thing. And then, yeah, you see how the shell is growing, and it's not quite coiled like you would expect to find in a gastropod, but it does appear to be going in that direction. And so those are a few. Here's one with that little pipe coming out the back. And there you go. Look at Yokelcionella go. Look at that. Look at that fast snail. I guess it's not a snail. It's a Halcyonellid, but still. Okay, let's look at some more of these. So here is a compressed shell. It's flattened like a pancake. But look what's in the center, and you can see that this is more or less identical to some of the small little cap-shaped mollusks, the Halcyonellids, that we saw earlier. And so this turned in some cases into this, just giant, sort of puddled, actually relatively large. We know that they are able to do repair for damaged shells, so probably at least some of their organs would have been protected by the conical part of the shell, and perhaps just something like a bit of mantle out here, so that if there was a crack in the shell, they may be able to repair it. And here you can see one that sort of shattered right across here. Maybe something tried to take a bite out of it, or maybe got thrown around in a storm. You know, a lot of stuff can happen in the ocean. And you see picked up a great big crack and then regrew this entire maybe third of its shell. There you can see the entire individual. Here you can see a different individual with similar repairs. Is that the same individual? I don't know. They're very similar. Yeah, they're very similar. All right. Next, extinct group worth remembering are the rostroconchs. And look at rostroconchs now. If you only knew about modern ones, you'd say, oh, these are the ones that are like a bivalve, but the two valves are actually cemented together. There are no teeth in between here. It is not a hinge. And evolving a hinge with teeth and the muscles that you would need to open and shut this would be a fairly big deal. So it may well be that these are not very close to bivalves, but are instead closer to, look at that. Look at what they've got back there. Do you see how we have a shell that sort of wraps around and then potentially a little exhaust pipe in the back. Yeah, look at rostroconchs again. So here we have a shell that wraps around, like on the sides. Those are the two things that look like bivalves but are fixed together. And we're going to bring in water in the front, and we're going to spit out the water at the back. So these are filter feeders. These are probably non-motile, or at least that's not their lifestyle. Yeah, they're going to live at least partly buried in the sediment. Yeah, rostroconchs. So these things can be found from the in the Cambrian, questionably, certainly by the Ordovician, and they definitely go away in the late Permian. So these were casualties of the Great Dying. Okay. Aplacophorans, these still exist. There is a weak fossil record for them. They will normally be covered in little hairs. Caudofoveata and the others, which are coming up. But you can call these, a general grouping would be Aplacophora, which just means no shell. Aplacophora, no shell, without plate. Monoplacophora with one plate, covering multiple reduplicated organs. And Polyplacophora with 8 plates altogether, like that. And these are going to live buried in sediment. Some of them burrow into things, for example. Here is a rare fossil for 2 reasons. One, it is an aplacophoran of some sort, Caudofoveata maybe. But the other is that it's been preserved in volcanic ash, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there we go. Ghosts in volcanic ash. So it's like a hollow that was formed around it. And because of that, they can actually model this very well, including all the little bristles on the side. So yeah, there's a nice little picture of a Silurian worm preserved in volcanic ash. Pretty awesome. Okay, but then back to the Cambrian. There are these small shelly fauna. And the thing there is that we never get bodies in the small shelly fauna. You just get the shells piled up. And most of the time from about 540 to 520, that's usually all that you get. That is the most common mode of preservation. There aren't really any exceptional fossil preservation sites that are much earlier than Sirius Passet in Greenland and Chengjiang in China. Yeah, that place. So you look at all these things and you say, all right, what are these? Well, this one you probably know over here on G, right? Can you remember that one? Yeah? Okay, good. But then you've got some little pieces here. Like, could that be the shell of one of these little Tribladida guys or Halcyonellid? Hard to say. Possible. You got things like this. This looks like one of the plates from the side of one of these velvet worm-like proto-arthropods. We will get to them later. But yeah, and there are other pieces where it's kind of hard to make a call. So are these teeth on the top? In which case it would have slotted into something else. So you got some of these that are like cups. Sometimes there are lids that go to the cups. And there are a bunch of different things in here. So they're going to include tomotids, which are right here, chancellorids. There's our little chancellorид spine. Halkyriids, and that's probably a Halkyria, little sclerite. But yeah, they're just going to be a variety of scale-like shells from the dawn of having a skeleton, basically, which is the thing that we don't really get in the Ediacaran, like mineralized skeletons. Okay, so chancellorids you know about. There was a time when people thought maybe this thing is a mollusk. Now we have moved on, and yeah, it is probably a sponge. This was made before some of those new papers came out. Halkyriids, like Halkyria, these turn out to actually be probably mollusks. And we have a whole other presentation to show you with some of these really early guys. Halkieria, Wiwaxia, just wonderful looking things that are like Polyplacophora, but with way more plates. So many more plates. But these are these little spines and plates and structures are generally going to be hollow, and so that's why they were originally equated with chancelloroid spines, because those are also hollow. Not everything that's hollow is related, but yeah, stuff is weird enough in the early Cambrian that it's good to keep an open mind. Here is a complete animal, Halkyriid, and you see you've got a sort of a head and a tail here, and there's actually two shells there, so two big shells that look quite different from each other and somewhat similar to other shells from some of these other Halcyonellids, for example. And then you're just covered in rows of different sclerites. So before they found this particular Halkieria evangelista fossil, yeah, up at Sirius Passet, we had a whole bunch of different creatures with different spines, and you couldn't tell if those are spines from the same creature. Like this may be one of the spines from the sort of front or back of a Halkieria, or if these are, from 20 different creatures. But yeah, an individual is going to contain about 2,000 sclerites, many different types in there. And yeah, it's just fantastic to see these things all together. But we'll get into the reasons why those are put into with the mollusks, because people have fought over these. These have been thrown in with the brachiopods at different times, annelids, yeah, and or you could say they're their own group. Totally makes sense. Here's an early mollusk, Odontogryphus. And Odontogryphus has this weird U-shaped gut. You can see it right there. So it's coming in one side, going out the other. That's very strange. But if you look right in the center and you blow it up, you'll have this or this or this. Those look like radula. And where you have radula, you have a good case, anyway, that you're looking at a mollusk. Now, of course, with a crown group, what you see may not make much sense, to call it the name of this thing that comes along much later, but it appears to be on the path. It appears to have more common features with mollusks than other things. And so, yeah, reasonable comparison. And this is the thing that we're comparing Kimberella quadrata to. That's one of the Ediacaran creatures where we haven't found any evidence of a radula in the fossil, but right next to them, there are all these little scratches in the bacterial biofilm. And those really look like they would have been made by radulas. They're like little rake-shaped things that are, they basically end with the animal. There's like a big field of these where it was sort of backing up and scraping and putting all that stuff down in its gullet. So here's an Odontogryphus. There it is, feeding on the microbial mat on the bottom and looking great, looking fabulous. Here's Kimberella quadrata. And here you can see an impression of Kimberella, because this is death mask preservation. And look at that death mask of these little scratches right there. And so the scratches are always next to one particular end. That's the end that sometimes appears to be stretched out, sometimes in. So we think it was sort of extensible, rubbery, yeah, kind of like this. And we think those are the little scratches from the radula. This one we think has a leathery shell because it sometimes gets compressed, sometimes gets folded a little bit, but does seem to provide some resistance and makes them stand up a little more. They have a sort of a wavy, what could be the muscular foot going around the outside on the edge. So there it is, dressed up as if it's a curly leaf lettuce submarine sandwich. And yeah, the current thinking is that this is probably on the way to becoming a mollusk. This is probably a crown group mollusk. But yeah, the best fossils are found in the White Sea region of Russia. We'll show you one in the class from there. And the first fossils were found in the Ediacara Hills of Australia. So compare those. So here are limpets. Here are some scratches that are made by these various kinds of snail as they feed. And limpets, what they'll do is they'll get up, they'll move around in the night, they'll make these little scratches, and then they'll go and cement themselves back down. They'll have their particular little spot, and they will plunk down on it. Compare that to the little scratches of a Kimbrella, and yeah, I'm seeing it. I gotta say, I am seeing it. Hallwaxids, we're going to get to more in the next one, things like Wuaxia. And these are just crazy looking, but they also have many different types of sclerites, different types and different lengths. And they, as of this one, it's uncertain whether they're mollusk, but when we get to the next one, you will see they are actually as much mollusk as like Kimberella or Odontogryphus is. They're part of that crown group. Very interesting crown group. Yeah, so in terms of the early evolution, this is a sort of an older reconstruction, but the idea is that you have things like annelids, and then we thought maybe you had the shellless ones here. Although some newer phylogenies actually put these as a much later branch. All the phylogenies will put Polyplacophora and Monoplacophora right down near the bottom. And then bivalves come in fairly early, but they're their own branch. Cephalopods are a fairly late branch. And gastropods, weirdly late in getting started. So what were those things? What were the Halcyonellids? And as you can see here, you could kind of put them down at the base of all these. They could be like an early placophoran, monoplacophoran kind of relative, Polyplacophora, Monoplacophora. They could be like an early bivalve relative if they're going to turn into rostraconchs, and then some rostraconch is going to suddenly figure out how to remuscle itself and put a hinge in so it can open and shut. Yeah, useful thing to have, but yeah, I would imagine a tough thing to develop. I would imagine that would take many coordinated genes, which would take a while to evolve. Although evolution's full of surprises, right? Yeah, it'd be nice to know more. Here's a more modern tree, and so here you can see, yeah, gastropods up here at the end. Polyplacophorans and monoplacophorans in this tree at least cluster together, but those are usually somewhere down on the more primitive end, and these would have scaphopods as the earliest branch, those tusk shells, which is interesting. Cephalopods being a later branch, it's up here, and things like bivalves, the different types of bivalves coming off there in the middle. So you've got those major groups that are still around. You've got these weird minor groups, including the tusk shells, the scaphopods, and the monoplacophorans. And yeah, it's interesting to try to fit these things together. With the modern ones, we at least have the option of a nice genetic based tree, based phylogeny. But yeah, with the older ones, all you have is the shell, and all you can do is a character matrix based on the features of the shell, unless there is some trace fossil evidence, for example, to back that up, or unless you happen to get lucky and run into that exceptional preservation. All right, so we will come back. This is a good pausing point. We are close to the end of this particular lecture, and then we'll come back and do this, and then we'll have one last one that covers the very early branches. So another little pause for you. Yeah.